It almost seems a bit conservative and cautious, but at the same time, I think it speaks well to have that kind of continuity at the very highest level.
You could say that Chan Sing and Ong Yi Kang are arguably the front runners, but I don't think the field is just limited to them.
It's definitely very interesting to see that, our future Prime Minister could already be in Parliament.
That's the reality of political life in Singapore, right? In a situation where we don't leave it to chance.
The votes are in, the general election is over, and a new parliament is taking shape. But before we close the chapter on GE 2025, there's just one last thing, and that's the cabinet lineup that was unveiled yesterday. Welcome back to another episode of The Usual Place, and I'm your host, Natasha. Now, today I'm looking at the cabinet changes, and to help me break down the cabinet appointments, I have Law Professor Eugene Tan, who is from SMU, and Nydia, the Managing Director of BowerGroupAsia, a strategic advisory firm. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. Was it mayhem yesterday for both of you? Or just me and Nydia? Because we were at Lady Gaga last night, dealing with the changes of the cabinet reshuffle. Eugene, I want to get your thoughts. Was this considered a safe reshuffle, or was this something major for you?
Well, it wasn't as extensive as I thought it would be, coming on the back of a strong election performance, right? And normally you would, on the back of a strong election performance, I suppose the Prime Minister could be a bit more adventurous. But really, I think the accent of the changes were really at the junior ministerial level, right? So below the cabinet, so we're talking about SMSs, MOSs, and senior PALSEC. So nine new office holders. And I think it is really the early iteration, of leadership renewal and succession involving the fourth and fifth generation.
Nydia, thoughts?
I really appreciate your Lady Gaga reference there with me.
Yeah, a lot of things collided yesterday.
Exactly. No, but I think it was a very, I guess it was unexpected in that it was a very safe choice, it almost seems a bit conservative and cautious, but at the same time, I think it speaks well to have that kind of continuity at the very highest level. So I think, in terms of the companies that I work with, I think a lot of them were very pleased that, a lot of their stakeholders still remain the same, and that, that would ensure not just stability, but also policy continuity when it comes to companies trying to plan or make decisions about their investments in Singapore for the coming years.
So essentially, they know who they are working with. And
Yes,
that's the
exactly.
relationship that has been built.
Exactly.
Was there one thing about the new cabinet that surprised you?
Well, I suppose the fact that there was no second deputy prime minister, but instead, PM decided that it would be better to have the core leadership buttressed by three coordinating ministers. Usually, we would think of them as ministers from the earlier generation, if I could put it that way. Not that you don't have, for example, DPM Heng Swee Keat was, coordinating minister as well. But I think, clearly PM is taking his time. I think, and I suppose, his peers are also comfortable, with that arrangement. But I suppose, by the midterm, which is in about, let's say, 2 years' time, we should have one or two new DPMs.
And I think a lot of people talked about this as the surprise, right? Not having two DPMs. But I think, would you be able to break it down about why having two DPMs is a thing? Like, why is it important? Or why are people so hung up over it? Because it's his choice if he just wants to have one. And,
yeah, correct.
Yeah.
It's just that I suppose, it's been a usual practice, for the Prime Minister to have two deputies, right? There's nothing anywhere that says that you must have two. And so PM Wong is obviously breaking that particular trend. But it's also a question, I suppose there's a lot of curiosity and interest because the DPM must be able to step up. Let's say when the Prime Minister is unable to do the job, let's say for illness or whatever, right? So we're talking about a permanent, we're not talking about temporary, when the Prime Minister, for example, is traveling, right? And so it'd be a bit it is a bit unusual if, let's say, PM is taken ill, let's say, touch wood, and then, you have Mr. Gan Kim Yong from the third generation leadership having to step up. But I suppose it's also a question of, people are also interested because they want to know, who would best complement PM, at least where PM's view is concerned. Yeah.
So is it now this we're talking about 4G leadership, right? So is it now between Chan Chun Sing and Ong Ye Kung to prove what they bring to the table in the next 2-3 years before the next reshuffle?
I think that would be the case, and I think also, when we look at how the government has always been structured with the two DPMs, I think it also very much echoed the structure that was in the PAP, where you have the Secretary General and then the two Assistant Secretary Generals. And up until a few years ago, it used to be that the first Assistant Secretary General was like identified as the next PM in line, right? And that was definitely how we back in the day found out that Heng Swee Keat was going to be the PM designate, because he was the first Assistant Secretary General at the time, with the second Assistant Secretary General being Chan Chun Sing. And so I think, now if you look at the Central Executive Committee in the PAP, they don't have that ranking system for the Assistant Secretary Generals anymore, but it is Chan Chun Sing and Desmond Lee. So, I think the expectation was, maybe that the Deputy Prime Minister would be either one of them. And then also when you think about the election results and Chan Chun Sing, anchoring Tanjung Pagar to a victory of over 80%, I think that positioned him very well to take on that role. But I think you can see that clearly, as Eugene mentioned, the Prime Minister is definitely taking his time to really assess what is going to happen in the coming years, maybe. And I think if you also look at how the roles of the DPMs previously, I think there was one that was like really more carved out to look at the economic issues, and then one that was really more focused on security issues. And so you can see that, in a way, it almost seems like Chan Chun Sing is really positioned perfectly for that now, also in his new capacity as Minister for Defense. So I think, eventually we might see that come up, even though at this point in time, the coordinating minister or the new coordinating minister for security is K. Shanmugam.
Yeah, so I think we could say that Chan Chun Sing and Ong Ye Kung are arguably the front runners, but I don't think the field is just limited to them. Mm-hmm. So as Nydia pointed out, I think Desmond Lee is in the frame, and I would also put Chee Hong Tat into that field as well. So I think nothing is cast in stone. There is certainly no inevitability, right, from being coordinating minister to DPM.
Is there anything that we should look out for in the next couple of years about who will become DPM, or for PM Wong to look out for? Or is really anything goes, because we can't tell what happened with the world, with geopolitics? What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to also see, a female's name up there as well,
I think someone mentioned, like one of the analysts said that it could possibly, or time for a female DPM, but it didn't happen, right?
Yeah, so that was a little bit disappointing, but, and especially when you look at, the three female ministers in cabinet, I don't think that there were any changes, which great for stability, but also surely they could have, done more in terms of pushing women up through the cabinet, or at least promoting an SMS to become a full minister.
I wouldn't be surprised, if we do have, a woman being appointed as one of the two. Let's say it goes back to two DPMs, one of them being a woman. I think it's a question of when rather than whether. I suppose, that there will be sectors who will be disappointed that that there are no new women ministers, but I think that there is a pipeline when you look at the junior ministerial level, the SMSs, the MOSs, and the senior PALSECs. I think it's a question of getting them ready, so that they can hold their own, and no one's going to look and say, well, there was affirmative action, because I think that will set back the cause of women in politics.
All right. So both of you mentioned Desmond Lee. Well, he is M&D minister. Tomorrow he'll be going to MOE. is it a lateral move? You know, because he's been at M&E for a long time and he took on the role during a very difficult period, you know, during COVID. So now he's moving to M&D and Mr. Chee Hong Tat will take over his role. So what are we to make of this movement? Or it's just a normal movement through ministries?
I think you can definitely see it quite positively. I think we've seen a lot of deputy prime ministers take on the education portfolio, including, you know, our current president Taman, as well as DPM Heng Swee Keat. So I think that you know, any move to education minister, and of course our Prime Minister Lawrence Wong was also on the education portfolio for a bit before I think during the COVID period, I think, where he was education minister for a while. So I think you can see that quite positively that, you know, his star is on the rise, and I think being able to handle education, which is one of the largest ministries within the government, I think would be a good test for him to see how he can handle, you know, I mean, clearly he can handle big ministries with MND and also the whole BTO issue, but looking at it a little bit more differently, I think it's a good sign that he's been assigned the education ministry.
Mr. Chee was just at Transport Ministry for a very short time. He was there for about, I want to say, a year and a half, because he took over Iswaran, right? And now he's going to go over to MND, which is also another big portfolio.
Yeah, so I think clearly PM thinks that you know, he is now ready for a new assignment.
Yeah, because two very big ministries, right, to help.
Transport has always been a hot seat, right? I mean, many of his predecessors, you know, in a way had their careers severely upended, you know, when they helmed the transport ministry. You know, so he has, in a way, emerged relatively unscathed.
And he's had a difficult year. There were a lot of train breakdowns.
Oh,
and,
you know,
a lot of transport projects as well.
Yeah. So, but I think I think there's a sense that, you know, the policy is good. You know, it's just the execution, right? But now he goes on to in a way a bigger canvas, right? National development, and that will see how he builds on what Minister Desmond Lee has done, you know, in terms of clearing the backlog in terms of in public housing, and now the question of, you know, will he be able to ensure, right, that Singaporeans, particularly younger Singaporeans, are persuaded, you know, that public housing is affordable and accessible. But I think beyond that, you know, he has now given up the second finance minister portfolio. So he is really full on national development. And I think what he makes of it, you know, could see him, you know, being prime, you know, for other assignments, right? So PM continues to hold the finance portfolio. I would say that, you know, Minister Chee could be in the running in future, you know, to be the finance minister, right? But much will depend on what he makes of, you know, this new big portfolio.
All right. So another ministry I want to talk about is the Ministry of Trade and Industry, because there's three ministers and then, you know, other junior political office holders. I think there's 6 of them there. But mainly the 3 ministers was Ng Chee Meng, then there's Tan See Leng, who's in charge of energy, science and technology, and Grace Fu, who's in charge of trade relations. Why do you think PM carved up the ministry this way? How much of geopolitical issues has to deal with this ministry and the way he has assigned the roles?
I think for the longest time, that ministry, and full disclosure, I used to work at MTI for quite a bit, has always been, you know, divided into two, right? One side a bit more focused on trade, the other side a bit more focused on the industry. And so, you know, I think having 2 ministers there had always been pretty standard for most part. I would say that, you know, the addition of the minister in charge of trade relations is a newer designation, but I think it makes sense given that, you know, DPM Gan is also the deputy prime minister, and he's now, you know, the proclaimed task force man. So I think, you know, having that additional support coming in from Minister Grace Fu has been very helpful.
Yes. He's bringing the task force together.
Yes, exactly. And so in that sense, I think having 3 people kind of makes sense in that way, because it allows, you know, I think it allows him to be able to designate, you know, certain things that events that he needs to go to but can't. And like, for instance, Minister Grace Fu was at Jeju recently for the APEC ministers responsible for trade meeting. And so I think, during that event, she also participated in a lot of sideline meetings, including one for the CPTPP ministers. And I think that's a very important one, given all the external developments that are relate to trade at this point in time. So I think I think, not that I'm biased or anything, I think it makes sense to have that many people in a very important ministry during uncertain times.
Yeah, so Natasha, the importance of MTI, the fact that you have 6 political office holders, I think it's a reflection, as Nydia pointed out, of the importance of trade and industry, right? The economy. So even as the focus in a way, has shifted to many other areas, it is important to remember that how well the economy does, will impact upon the ability, to fund other programs, for an aging society, for young families, for marriage and parenthood, among other things. And we could really look at DPM Gun also pretty much as the coordinating minister for economic policies.
Exactly.
And of course the addition of, Minister Tan Ling to look at energy, science and technology, again, emphasizes, the need, to pay attention to these new areas, right? So whether we're talking about energy security or how we can leverage on science and technology to grow the economy, I think it just shows you the sort of agenda that lies ahead, for the MTI political office holders. In light of, the uncertainty, right, as a result of, the ongoing and rapidly evolving terrorist war, right? But more than that, right, it's also a concern about, how the multilateral framework that Singapore has thrived under, right, since independence, that is also being upended, and how it becomes important for Singapore, to be able to find, new trading arrangements, that will ensure that, the economy continues to hum along for the good of Singapore and Singaporeans.
Okay, so this election, GE 2025, saw a lot of new faces, and a lot of these new faces have now, well, not a lot, but 7 of them have been appointed as political office holders by PM Wong. And among the appointees were Mr David Ng and Mr Jeffrey Sell, who will both be acting ministers. And they're also senior ministers of state at other ministries. What does it mean to have an acting minister? Just so that everybody is on the same page about it. So they're not exactly like full ministers.
They're not. So their substantive rank, if I could put it that way, as senior ministers of state. But the fact that they are appointed acting minister, right, so in a way they are holding an appointment that is higher than their substantive rank, does signal, PM's confidence that they will be able to get the job done, in those 2 ministries, right? And they are not, in a way, easy ministries, right? We know transport has always been a hot seat, and MCCY, given that there's a bumper crop of new political office holders there, could also signal, that in this stage of Singapore's development, national identity, among other things, right, that come under MCCY, culture, community, and youth, that these are, that it could be time for, a new outlook. And we mustn't forget, PM Wong began his ministerial career, as a minister at MCCY. And we see over the years, this soft side of Singapore, right? What does Singapore stand for? What are its values? What does it mean to live in community despite the differences? Things like multiculturalism, which is a new fangled term in Singapore's political lexicon. Youth, right? The young. How do we get, young people engaged? To have a sense that Singapore, has a future for them. That these are really, I think, some of the key issues that the new political office holders in MCCY, will have to grapple with.
About new faces, did you expect this many, or do you expect more new faces to be in the cabinet or with junior political office holders, or was it the right mix?
I think if you look at most of the new faces that are appointed political office holders at this point in time, they very much fit the mold of political office holders that come in. You have your senior government officials, you have senior military men, you have the former nominated member of parliament. I think that is very much within that mold of people that have been typically selected to take on this role. There were some newer faces that I thought would also be political office holders. Other former government officials that had left the civil service. But I think for those, I think it's only a matter of time. I'm also a little bit intrigued by the appointments of, for instance, Desmond Chu, who's coming in as Minister of State, because he's been in Parliament for 10 years now, and I'm curious to find out a bit more about what was that trigger, after 10 years of being a backbencher to be brought in to be a political office holder, as well as I think Zulkarnain, who's coming in with MSF, but I think only coming in next year, because I think he needs to probably sort out some things with his current position before he can make that switch over. I'm always curious about what is behind that decision. After you've been a backbencher for a while, to step up.
Guess, what would you think it could be? Like, what triggers PM to move someone from the backbench to become a political office holder?
Well, obviously they would have excelled, as a backbencher, right? So Desmond Chu also had a role in the labor movement. He was also a mayor. So I would say that these are PM would have assessed them, right? And I think for Zulkarnain, it's also very much about the need to beef up the leadership, where Malay Muslim MPs are concerned. I think that they're a bit thin at the moment with Mr. Maliki retiring. But this is a bumper crop of, if I could put it that way, of people with POH potential, right? And clearly PM is taking advantage of it, right? Giving 9 of them, political appointments. How they do, will determine whether they have a more significant trajectory. But I think the signs are that, many of them will continue to grow, will grow in their roles. So I think it's really, trying to set the scene, for leadership renewal. I think in a way PM is concerned, that time is not really on Singapore's side, right? Because if you look at the 5th generation prime minister, right, he or she will have to be in place, right, as easily as a decade from now. So you don't really have a lot of time, right? So PM Wong entered politics in 2011, became PM in 2024, right? So a matter of about 13 years, and as demands of political life increases, I would say that in some respects, a runway, from being your first appointment as a political office holder to PM, probably will increasingly be shorter. So I think here is the focus. I think, they're not going in a big way yet, but I think it's important to blood, as many of the 5th generation leaders as possible, and that's why you have this mid-career appointments, right? Desmond Chu or Zulkarnain, as examples, and earlier you had Mr. Murali, who was also promoted again, this time to Senior Minister of State. That it is important, to have this constant infusion, right, from both, particularly from the private sector.
I think when you lay it out that way, it's definitely very interesting to see that, our future prime minister could already be in parliament, right? He is, he or she is your current Minister of State or a possible SMS.
Definitely.
I think, so I think that's the group that we need to look at very closely, especially for my clients. I would, start encouraging them to cultivate and build these relationships already. Yeah.
So some people did not get promoted this round. They remain in their appointments. And newcomers have leapfrogged them into more senior positions. What should we read into this?
I wouldn't read too much. I think PM put it very well. Different political office holders, have different runways. They develop at their own pace. And if more time is needed, I don't think it's anything negative. So I would say that I'm not sure leapfrogging, would mean that, someone who didn't get a promotion, is not made for bigger things. And I think PM was also clear, that in the end, each political office holder, contributes in his or her own way. Not all of them will become ministers, but some of them, will be very effective at the junior ministerial level. I think it will be a problem if everyone's entering politics, only feels that, the ministerial appointment, is the holy grail for them. Because I think that there will, not everyone, will be a cabinet minister. But we also need people at the lower levels of government, to get the job done, to come up with ideas, to implement policies, to work the ground, to get the ground on their side. So you need that multiple layers, multiple levels of ability and talent.
So we shouldn't see it as a very linear trajectory. Like if I'm a senior PowSec, then I should move on to MOS immediately, and then SMS, and then it's not that way. It doesn't work
It's not
that
a
way.
sprint, to put it another
Okay.
way. That maybe
Yeah.
sometimes, it is actually a marathon.
Yeah, I think if you look at, for instance, some of the promotions that took place this time around, I think Bayam King had been senior parliamentary secretary for a very long time. And so it was great to see that, he finally got some recognition and got promoted up to Minister of State. But, along that same vein too, I think, I guess if you look at, being a political office holder as any regular job, even though it's probably not any kind of regular job at all. But, for instance, if I was, Sim N and I had been Senior Minister of State for about 10 years now, it can be, I guess, a bit demoralizing if you haven't been promoted. But I wouldn't say that, it's but what Eugene said, there are different strengths to different people. And I think that certainly she's carved out a niche for herself in foreign affairs. I think, definitely there's a lot of interest that I see from companies in wanting to engage her to better understand, I think during this period, and given her background, how best to engage with China, for instance, or how to work with ASEAN. There's definitely a lot of interest there to see how, to tap on her insights and her perspectives. And I think she's done very well for herself in that regard. And I think, similarly speaking, I think, Dr. Janil has done really well in his portfolio previously for health and in MDDI, where he kind of also sat at the intersection of health and data. And that, I think, exposed him to a lot of different companies who very much always wanted the chance to hear his insights and hear his views on how they could, better support the government in achieving their objectives. But I think now that, he's in, two entirely new ministries, I think it will also be a good chance to see how he does in those ministries as well. Greater exposure to different aspects of governance, and I think the opportunity is really for him to prove himself at that level too.
So I quickly want to touch on people changing portfolios. Everyone's changing portfolios. What am I talking about? I'm talking about acting minister for Muslim affairs, which has changed. So it used to be Mr. Masagos. Now it's Dr. Faishal Ibrahim. He's the acting minister in charge of Muslim affairs now. What should we make of this? Is this something that has come up because of the general election, or why this change for the Muslim affairs minister?
I would say a variety of factors. I think clearly, the assessment is that, that there is a need for a change in leadership, and Senior Minister of State Faishal, stepping up. In a way, his stepping up, as the acting minister in charge of Muslim affairs, does point to a gap, in the Malay Muslim leadership in the highest ranks of government, right? With Mr. Maliki's retirement, that leaves, Mr. Masagos as the only cabinet minister from the Malay Muslim community. And so, I think this was the first time ever since the position was created that there will not be that it is not a cabinet minister, right, who is put in charge of Muslim affairs. Now, it's not a negative thing, right? The idea that someone at the junior ministerial level, can get the job done. But I think, it does reflect, that gap, and so I think there will be a lot of focus on developing, the Malay Muslim office holders, and the goal, I suppose, would be by midterm, to have at least one of the junior political office holders, being appointed, to the cabinet. But it's an important stakeholder, right? And obviously, the assessment is, there is a need for change, and because it is important for the government to continue to be able to engage, the Malay Muslim ground, in meaningful and purposeful ways.
Labour Chief Ng Chee Meng, he came up yesterday because he was not assigned any role in the cabinet as per his request.
Yeah.
And Prime Minister Lawrence Wong said at a press conference yesterday that the absence of a Labour chief in the cabinet is a temporary arrangement. What should we make of this teaser, if I can call it that, after public sentiment about Mr. Ng? Like, will we see him in cabinet eventually, or are we going to see another Labour chief in cabinet? Hot takes.
It's hard to say. I mean, the way Prime Minister spoke about it yesterday, it seemed to suggest that, he hopes that, given some time, some of the backlash that came about with social media posts about Ng Chee Meng would just die down. And I think also the photo definitely didn't help him. But I would say that, I think just given all the outrage that we've seen coming as a result of, some of the things that he has allegedly done, I think it will be very hard to see him back in government. And I think that while it may be good to, give people some time to maybe let things die down a little bit after the elections and, just maybe have him just huddle down and just do some work quietly. I'm not 100% sure that we'll see him back in government again. I don't know whether he can be appointed in that sense to government given after all the backlash. But at the same time too, I think, he will still be, in his role as Secretary General of NTUC, very much heavily involved in a lot of the government initiatives and policies. He is a member of the Singapore Economic Resilience Task Force. And so, I think that would be a good place for him to show his capabilities and how he can contribute without necessarily being a formal part of the cabinet in that sense.
But I think given the symbiotic relationship, right, between the ruling party and the umbrella labour movement, the NTUC, I think there will be some expectation, that the workers are represented, at the cabinet level. So 5 years has been perhaps, a feasible temporary working arrangement, but to continue for another 5 years, I think there may be some concern there. So PM didn't shut the door, on Mr. Ng's return, to the cabinet. But I think it is also fair to say that PM was also non-committal, right? And I think Nydia has pointed out, there are a variety of considerations, right? can he redeem, his checkered re-entry into politics as one? Interestingly, Workers' Party, Andre Lau, will also be in Parliament as a non-constituency member of Parliament, right? So the two candidates contesting for Jalan Kayu, will be in Parliament as backbenchers, and so there will be that the eye will be on them, and to see how well they perform. But we shouldn't be surprised, if the sense is that that there should be a new Labour chief, right? But that doesn't preclude Mr. Ng from getting back into the cabinet, right? He could come into cabinet, as a minister, but he has this work cut out for him, right? To redeem, to recover from the backlash, and to show that, his entry into cabinet, will not be a source of controversy. And I think PM was very mindful, that he wants the focus, on this new lineup, not to be distracted, by unnecessary controversy.
I feel like this next parliament we have a lot to look forward to in terms of like what's going to happen in terms of like issues geopolitically, but also the ministers and how it will all play out till the next reshuffle. Till we see one.
I mean, it is, right? So you look at, PAP will have 87 MPs, right? And almost half are political office holders. And I think this is where it becomes imperative, for the PAP backbenchers, to step up, right? Because, you don't want a situation where it's the PAP front bench, against, the entire Workers' Party. I think there is a role, and I think people want to see what is it that the PAP backbenchers can do, and the PAP backbenchers have to show that they are relevant, right? That they're not just to make the numbers, but that, and that they can leave everything, to the front bench, right, to the political office holders, So I think, there were 3 parties in the last parliament, now there'll be 2, and we can be sure, that the competition in a way will become a lot more intense, from the get-go.
And that's where I think, the government parliamentary committees will be even more important, because that's where, the backbenchers will have the opportunity to actually express their views, ask questions that, I think would be useful to show that, they've done their homework, they've reviewed all these like upcoming legislation that's coming up, and asking the right questions that reflect, the concerns of constituents, in terms of, whether it's cost of living or whether it's accessible housing, I think, or even just, healthcare policies. I think those would be top of mind for Singaporeans in the years to come.
Right. So let's round this off by looking at PM Wong's cabinet as a whole. Are there any notable differences and strengths in what this new team brings to the table as compared to like previous cabinets?
Well, it's younger, because
that's a very obvious.
Because you have the retirement of, 4 ministers, and the youngest being 60 years of age, Dr. Maliki. There were no new additions, so I think, the simple math, if I got my math correct, would be that the average age of the cabinet minister, has gone down. So I would say that, I think the 4G renewal is, I think, either at steady state now or even complete, that the focus has shifted, to the 5th generation. I think there may have been surprises mentioned earlier that there were no new promotions where women ministers are concerned. And I think there will also be the focus on minority representation, right? So the promotion of Mr. Murali to Senior Minister of State, I think that, but that we also didn't have any, new Indian woman POH or Malay woman POH. So I think there are these gaps that I'm sure PM and his colleagues, will be working, to address. Because I think it's important, that we have strong representation, from across the communities, not through affirmative action, but through, these individuals, showing that they're equal to the task of holding, these different appointments. So I think, all eyes will be on how, this strongest team, as PM described it, grows from strength to strength. And will he say that, his next cabinet lineup is even stronger than the one that will be sworn into office, tomorrow, Friday?
I think it's definitely, you see that the 4G renewal is definitely more or less there already. And now these 4G leaders are going to be the ones that will have to guide the younger 5G leaders, that are the junior political office holders coming up. I think that definitely this is very much an interesting one to take note of, just because of, I think there's been so much news and developments that have that social media has definitely helped amplify in the past few years. And I think that, going forward, we can expect that the public will definitely scrutinize this parliament and this cabinet a bit more closely. And so I think all eyes will be on how the 4G leaders will then be helping to lead and guide the younger generations moving forward.
Actually, my mind is just blown that we're already talking about 5G. We're just talking about the 4G. I feel like time is moving too fast.
But Natasha, I think that's the reality of political life in Singapore, right? In a situation where we don't leave it to chance, we try to ensure that, the next set of leaders, and you see that even in the leading opposition party, the Workers' Party, right? The emphasis on younger candidates. And I think the moment we take our foot off the pedal, right, in terms of renewal, I think that's when, we will have gaps, bigger gaps, and even with that so meticulous preparation, there are still gaps, right? Because there are so much uncertainties in political life, there are the vagaries in politics, so a lot of effort, needs to be put. And I'm, for me at least, assured that we're now focusing on the next generation. And I think that's how politics and governance, will continue to grow in strength and importance. And I think that's good for Singapore and Singaporeans.
Yeah, and how crazy is it that, in this, like, last however minutes we've been talking, we've never even once touched on Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong. And like, who would have thought that would be the case, right? I mean, he does have, portfolios that are relevant and important. He's going to be in charge of, research and innovation. And it seems like, he's mainly taken over or will continue on his portfolio, but it's also a mix of, I think, what Heng Swee Keat used to cover as well. But it's like, we didn't even touch on him at all.
He's there,
Who would
we
have
didn't
thought
forget.
that,
He's
in
there.
the conversation about, Singapore government and cabinet, that we didn't even talk about, the biggest 3G leader. That
But he will play like will we see him in a mentorship kind of role?
For sure.
For sure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you think his role will be in this cabinet?
I think very much, certainly as mentor, but you also saw him during the general election, right? Making very timely interventions, through his campaign speeches, but also, that recognition, he is his own brand, if I could put it that way. But he's mindful that he should let the 4G leaders go about their tasks, but I think, we can certainly see him weigh in, right, on sensitive domestic issues. But his focus, I think, will be very much on the international scene, right? Where over the long course of 40 years in politics at the highest levels, that vast network, that recognition, of who Mr. Lee is, all that, will be assets. So we now have, again, right, that intergenerational cabinet, right? 3G, 4G, and now, the makings of 5G. And this is what makes, government and governance unique, right? The exceptional quality that we need, to ensure that Singapore continues to thrive.
On that note, thank you very much for being here. And as Eugene mentioned, the cabinet will be sworn in tomorrow. And that's it from me for today. So if you're watching this episode on YouTube, like, subscribe, or hit the notification bell to get fresh content. And you can also catch The Usual Place on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on the ST app. I'll see you next time at The Usual Place.